After the completion of the senior grade dokkaebi test, Bihyung was somehow lazy. All he had to do was manage the Korean Peninsula scenario that was left to him by the former Seoul branch manager, Barum. Sometimes all he had to do was lie down and watch the scenarios he made. "Hiwanchi, it's this way." "Damn, I missed one. One person is going to the north." On the screen, one of the scenarios on the Korean Peninsula, called Catching the Mole, was in full swing. It was a scenario where they had to catch all the bomb moles that escaped within a certain time. A terrible explosion would occur if one was missed, but the constellations of the Korean Peninsula didn't seem distressed.
"Titano found it. I'll take care of it with Yusung."
The incarnation showed perfect organization and teamwork. It was different from some countries where a quarter of the land was blown away from similar scenarios. Of course, this scenario wouldn't be approved if it had such extreme difficulty.
"Damn, why is it like this?"
Bihyung grumbled as he bit his fingers. In fact, he could increase the difficulty of this scenario much higher. It could blow up half the Korean Peninsula and lead the incarnations to a terrible disaster. However, he didn't do so.
"I should have saved Kim Dokja at that time. If I raise the difficulty here, they will surely die."
It was too late to regret it now. No matter how many preparations were made, it was impossible to live outside the scenario. The constellations of the Korean Peninsula are supporting Kim Dokja's party. The constellations of the Korean Peninsula have sponsored 2,000 coins. The reason why Bihyung's channel was maintained was due to the subscribers Kim Dokja left behind. The constellations were steadily supporting the scenario regardless of whether they were interesting or not. However, the channel didn't only have such constellations. Many constellations are bored with the progress of the scenario. Some constellations have left the channel. Kim Dokja disappeared and Yoo Jung-hyuk left the Korean Peninsula scenario. Thus, the number of constellations abandoning the channel grew every day. In other words, Bihyung was slowly dying.
"I need to make changes. But how?"
Of course, he knew how. If he raised the difficulties of the scenario like before and tricked the constellations, the subscribers would increase again. Nevertheless, Bihyung no longer wanted to lead the scenario that way.
"Maybe I've changed as well."
He had changed from his old self who only pursued unconditionally stimulating scenarios and didn't care much about the life and death of the incarnations. Bihyung wanted to tell a different story. He wanted to forget the cider that the Bureau mentioned and see different scenarios. Just like the scenarios made by the first-generation dokkaebis, something that would be remembered for a long time by the other dokkaebis. Bihyung. Bihyung heard something through the dokkaebi communication and reflexively rose. "You look good. Have you been well?" The face that emerged on the panel was Barum, former Seoul branch manager who left the Seoul Dome after becoming a great dokkaebi candidate. The astounded Bihyung quickly acted politely. After leaving the Seoul branch, Barum entered the Senior Administrative Bureau. It was a place where the wisest dokkaebis around the world gathered. Barum on the panel seemed more impressive than he did before. "I contacted you because I have a few messages." "A few?" Bihyung was a bit nervous. It was because he never received good news when Barum spoke in such a meaningful manner.
"There are signs of a giant story."
"Isn't there still a lot of time left until Gigantogomakia or Ragnarok?" "It isn't these stories. The giant story being set up is in the demon world." Bihyung's expression changed at the words demon world. "Is it the Demon King selection?" Bihyung watched Barum nodding and gulped. Unlike the giant stories that appeared on a regular basis, the Demon King selection was a very rare scenario. Bihyung had never seen the Demon King scenario in person. The last selection tournament was already 800 years ago. Just imagining the giant story caused his heart to shake with excitement. Barum read Bihyung's heart and laughed. "Are you looking forward to it?"
"I'm looking forward to it, but I also feel regret. Who's the dokkaebi responsible for it?"
The demon world had been in the domain of the Weni people since ancient times. It was a barren scenario area where channels almost never opened. This was the demon world. Then the broadcast of the Demon King selection. This time is different. The Bureau has decided to dispatch dokkaebis to the demon world. Huh? The dokkaebis didn't interfere in the work of the Wenny people, and the Wenny people didn't interfere in the work of the dokkaebis. This was the promise of the horizon. Now Barham's words were directly contradicting the covenant. I was originally planning to open a channel after signing a new agreement with the Wenny people, but it has become more complicated. They broke the promise first. They broke the promise? An illegal channel has occurred in the demon world. Huh? It was something that couldn't happen according to common sense. There were no dokkaebis in the demon world. Then how was a channel opened? I'm not sure about the exact details. That's why the Bureau is in an uproar right now. If the Wenny people stole a channel, can't you close it from here? The operating rights of the channel were limited to the dokkaebi. Even if the Wenny people stole a channel using a strange trick, the Bureau could easily handle it by closing 1 or 2 channels. The problem isn't the Wenny people.
It isn't the Wenny people? Then who opened the channel?
It seems there's a dokkaebi in the demon world.
Dokkaebi?
Wait, perhaps. No, it wasn't possible. Barham kept speaking. In any case, that's why I've dispatched dokkaebi from the Bureau to the demon world.
I see. By the way, why are you telling me this?
You are on the list to be sent.
I'm in charge of the Korean Peninsula.
Other dokkaebis will take care of the Korean Peninsula for a while. Take a few intermediate dokkaebis and go to the demon world. Bihyung was silent for a moment. Leave the hottest Earth scenario and go to the demon world? This was the same as a demotion. Aren't there a few incidents on the Korean Peninsula anyway? Don't feel too sorry. Your dream of going higher can be achieved if you do this properly. You told me a similar story last time.
Why me?
I don't know the exact reason, but the elders pointed to you directly. There is no refusing if they've decided. Bihyung's expression became depressed. He had to go to that dangerous area? I know what you're thinking, but don't be too depressed. It isn't a demotion. Rather, I have one more piece of information that you might like to hear. Bihyung raised his head without any expectations, while Barham spoke in a strange voice. The Demon King of Salvation has appeared in the demon world. We were silent for a long time. 30 minutes passed after Yoo Jin-hyuk's words before I finally opened my mouth. In these 30 minutes, I saw Eileen enter and leave the room once. Yoo Jin-hyuk, did you bring the Ariel doll? Yoo Jin-hyuk silently pulled out the doll at my question. I carefully examined the doll. The arms and legs were all torn apart. It might be a symbolic body, but Uriel's real body would have been impacted by such a blow. An archangel with such pride was suffering like this in the demon world. I can't go back now.
I see.
He answered as if he already knew. I turned my head and saw that Yoo Jin-hyuk was also watching the Uriel doll. We didn't speak, but we could clearly tell what the other person was thinking.
Are you going to take part in the Demon King selection?
That's right. The Demon King selection. It was a scenario I had to go through to confront the Constellations in the future. I'm sorry for the party members, but I have to get a giant story here. I spoke while carefully attaching Uriel's torn arm. This way, I can prepare for the future destruction scenarios. My choices would be limited if I returned to Earth. I could get opportunities here and build up my power, so it wasn't efficient to go back now. The scenario difficulty had already become more terrible than in the original novel. I would only lose time from my work if I returned to Earth. Yoo Jin-hyuk stared at me for a moment.
It isn't a bad idea.
His tone showed me many things. Perhaps Yoo Jin-hyuk understood my heart more than anyone else. It was because he lost his precious things when he was weak. I asked, "What are you going to do?"
I'm going to stay in the demon world for a while. There is a personal scenario here, so I can't leave right away.
I see. Really, if you don't mind, why don't you help me out?
I'm helping myself, not you.
I looked up at Yoo Jin-hyuk because I wanted to know what he meant. It was clearly the same expressionless face as before, but something felt different. Are you also planning to participate in the Demon King selection?
It is natural.
My mind became complicated. This jerk, he was thinking about taking part in the Demon King selection? Wait, you told me to go back to Earth. Yu Jung-hyuk ignored me and got up to go to the window. The faint light of the sunset cast a dark shade on Yu Jung-hyuk's face. According to Ways of Survival, Yu Jung-hyuk pretended to have a cool face when he was caught. This bastard, he wanted to send me back to Earth and become the Demon King. The shameless back looked like it wanted to flee. Then Yu Jung-hyuk opened his mouth.
They're coming.
A cold surged from outside the window as Eileen and Mark ran through the door of the treatment room. I was able to know what was going on without listening to them. It was because Bihyung had woken up and was staring at me nervously. The Constellation, founder of humanity, is looking at the Yu Jung-hyuk Industrial Complex. The Constellation, the last pharaoh, is looking at the Yu Jung-hyuk Industrial Complex. The constellations of a certain nebula are looking at the Yu Jung-hyuk Industrial Complex. More than a dozen stars twinkled in the sky, and one of them let out an intense burst of light and sparks. After a while, a huge shape started to appear at the entrance of the industrial complex. It was the direct descent of an incarnation body. It was a giant mummy with a golden crown on its head. The height surpassed the walls, and the incarnations in the industrial complex started screaming. If I remembered correctly, this constellation belonged to Papyrus. In addition, Papyrus had joined hands with Birkin. Yu Jung-hyuk spoke in a terrible tone.
I guess they've come to protest.
There was no need to ask what the protest was about. It was already the prelude to the Demon King selection.